Hey, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for joining today's webinar in which we'll share how you can use maps, models, and technical insights to understand flood risk. I'm Jim Craig, and I'm Technical and Marketing Director for the Oasis Hub, and I'll be your host for today. By way of a background, the Oasis Hub was formed in 2015, and we're a joint initiative of EIT Climate Kick, Oasis Loss Modelling Framework, or LMF as we like to call them, and the Oasis Plus Consortium, with the aim really of increasing the availability of information on catastrophe and climate change risk and to assist the development of evidence-based climate adaptation planning. The founding members bring together expertise from throughout Europe, throughout the EU, including financial and prestigious academic and research organisations. And really it's about encouraging the development of a broader market. The Oasis Hub is an online portal. It's a marketplace for the publishing and purchasing of environmental data, adaptation planning tools, models and services. And contributors range from individuals through to the large organisations I've just referenced. The webinar is being recorded today, and I'll send a link to the recording once the webinar's over. And just a few words on the software that we're using today, the Zoom webinar platform. If you move your mouse to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a small panel of buttons appear, of control buttons appear. If you have a question for any of the team, if you click the Q&A button, that will allow you to ask us a question. And what I encourage you to do is, as we go through the webinar, please feel free to ask a question. And what we'll do is we'll compile them as we go, and then we'll spend some time at the end and we'll answer as many of them as we can. Any that we can't answer in the time that we've got available, we'll respond to you directly via email. I'd like to introduce you to my guest today. So Dr. John Bevington is Technical Director of Earth Observation and Software Development at JBA. John's got 11 years experience in the industry. John wears a number of hats. He covers a number of roles at JBA, including project management and business development, and with a focus really on disaster risk management and remote sensing and product innovation. Working extensively in the insurance and the disaster risk management sectors. John is also project director of JBA's flood foresight system, and he also represents JBA on the risk modelling steering group of the Insurance Development Forum, the IDF. Joining John is Jessica Boyd, and Jessica leads a team of catastrophe risk analysts at JBA, and they're undertaking a variety of projects for the reinsurance industry and for the disaster risk reduction sector. The team focuses on model evaluation, post-event response, portfolio analytics, and also bespoke consultancy projects as well. So both Jess and John have a huge amount of experience working on overseas projects, which you'll hear about in a moment, as we're going to take you on something of an inspiring world tour. So John, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Jim. Very well, thanks.
That's good to hear. Would you mind giving some people a background to JBA, please?
Yes, no problem. Well, for those that don't already know about JBA, we're an award-winning multidisciplinary group of companies delivering professional services across a wide range of water, environmental, engineering, and risk management specialties. Over the last 23 years, we've grown several teams of specialists in flood risk science, hydrological and hydraulic modelling, flood mapping, flood forecasting, software systems development, just to name a few of our teams. But we also have skilled ecologists, statisticians, engineers, the list goes on really. We work with governments from local to national level. We work with international development agencies, insurers, and all the time we try and help our clients understand flood and climate risk through a combination of robust science, model development, and development of tools and systems for communicating risk. The majority of our work has been in the UK and Ireland, but increasingly we're transferring our skills to tackle similar problems, but in an international context. We've got a division dedicated to developing global flood hazard data, flood models, and services to the insurance and financial services sectors. So overall, now we've got about over 600 people across the world in 25 offices in 9 countries. They're shown here. And really, we, at the core of JBA, we place a great deal of importance on collaboration, both between our teams, our offices and disciplines, but then also with third parties. We're really trying to work together to provide the best service for our clients. So just a little bit more about the history of JBA and of our flood maps. Back in 2007, we had a very ambitious target to apply JBA's expertise in small-scale flood modelling to a wider scale, and the first national scale flood map of Great Britain was created for the insurance sector. It enabled us to create CAT models, flood catastrophe models, for many territories, including the UK, but also India, Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam. And these have been used widely in the insurance and reinsurance industries, but now are being more widely applied for disaster risk reduction. But the next big challenge was to scale up the flood mapping, so we could not only map just nationally, but also globally. So a global river and surface water maps were generated in 2014, and a global event set was completed in 2017, which enabled us to more quickly and easily develop models in areas that were not previously modeled. So we've been recently upgrading our global flood maps. Here's a visual showing the fact that we've got flood maps for every country in the world at a spatial resolution of at least 30 meters. And we've recently updated the USA maps, which we've now published at 5-meter resolution. And an example here is in Jacksonville, Florida. So our plan is to use these maps and models to and make them more widely available through the Oasis Hub, as well as the Oasis Loss Modeling Framework, which will enable the maps to be used and the models to be more accessible for non-traditional uses outside of insurance. So uses for use by governments and by NGOs, for example. Now you might say, well, why does all of this matter? Well, globally, there's a few things going on. People are flocking into cities. Cities are getting bigger, and the growth is not always planned, going to plan, or even developed according to code or standard. So this wide-scale development, combined with a changing climate, can increase the overall disaster risk. And disasters can put back development of lower income economies for many years after the event. And at the same time, disasters will often disproportionately affect those people most vulnerable, those communities most vulnerable, the people that often have no other choice but to live in hazardous areas, such as on floodplains. So we should probably remember in all of this that there's no such thing really as a natural disaster. Disasters often follow natural hazards, but ultimately they occur when when a hazard meets an exposed community or an asset, a road, a hospital, a house, for instance, and that asset will have a certain level of vulnerability to the hazard, depending on how and how it's constructed or how it's built. So at JBA, we build numerical models that provide a representation of flood and climate risk using these principles. Interestingly, and it's shown here on the slide, but one of our recent studies showed that globally, by the year 2020, about 2 billion people around the world will be at risk of inland flooding. Now that to me is staggering, but when you think of the effects of coastal flooding and climate change, we may even be in a situation where that figure could be higher. So in short, our data, maps, models, and specialist knowledge are helping governments, insurers, development organizations, etc., better understand the risk of disasters, but then also help with emergency management during events. So we'll now take you on a world tour, as Jim alluded to, showing you some of our most recent disaster risk management activities. And don't forget, as you go along, please submit your questions using the Q&A box in the webinar controls. So our first port of call is Suriname. Here we've been working on a project supporting the Suriname government and World Bank as part of a wider study into the Suriname Coastal Resilience Assessment for the Greater Paramaribo region. So our key objectives of this study were to inform the development of a program of interventions, associated policies, and investment plan required to address flood and erosion risk, and provide the necessary tools to investigate the cost benefit of different coastal resilience options. So our coastal risk management and coastal geomorphology teams investigated the flooding and erosion risks to Greater Paramaribo. Now, Paramaribo is the capital city and home to about 240,000 people. It's also, interestingly, the only urban area along the whole coastline of Suriname. It's low-lying and therefore is threatened by flood risk from coastal surge, but as well as that, they also have to deal with riverine and surface water sources. So we wanted to understand the influence of human and natural processes on coastal resilience and the role that mangroves play as part of sustainable flood mitigation solution. So we considered the wider benefits that mangroves provide, especially in a region that suffers from extreme coastal erosion when mangroves are depleted. Ultimately, our technical support helped with optioneering a range of intervention measures, such as sand traps, as seen here. So we carried out a flood modelling study across the whole city of Paramaribo, assuming that no sea level rise, but also assuming a future sea level rise of 1/2 metre. Paramaribo is very, very sensitive to sea level rise, and an increase of 1/2 metre would mean that floods currently at the 1 in 100 year return period would have a probability of occurring more like 3 times per year. So the increases would be significant. And we found that there were people already living in both the flood and the erosion zones around the city. And our modelling showed that areas of flooding do not necessarily correspond to the contours on the terrain. Flooding here is mostly tidal, and despite its proximity, as you can see on the map, to such a large river. So we took satellite images and back to the 1970s, and we looked at the boundary between the ocean and land, and we could see that that's constantly moving. We have erosion of hundreds of meters over a few decades. So we're dealing with an extremely dynamic coastal region due to the migration of mud and the mud engine, effectively driven by processes that you can trace back to the Amazon River. So in terms of providing mitigation options, mangrove restoration would in fact aid coastal stability here by providing not only the resistance, but also helping offset the erosion problem. It would also then have a flip side of providing added flood protection. However, what we saw in this study was mangroves alone, a single intervention alone, will not completely prevent flood impacts. So the Greater Paramaribo region is an integrated flood risk management strategy. It's likely to require some sort of flood barrier set back from the coastline, combined with a mix of natural, structural, and non-structural interventions. The revision of land planning policies is critical to economically support the use of defences. But overall, I think that institutional changes should also be introduced, and therefore allowing development of planning policy. So it's clear, overall, it's clear from this example that there's no single silver bullet, single intervention that would solve the flood risk situation in Paramaribo, but an integrated approach drawing on many different scientific disciplines has provided our clients here with hopefully a clearer view of what is a very complex and complicated environment. So this insight can support the discussions that the World Bank can have with the national government to develop suitable plan for interventions, investment, and also to help drive policy. So we're undertaking a similar study at the moment, actually, in Panama City, and some of our project team just got back from the kickoff mission last week. So that's our first stop on our tour. I'm now going to move across to Africa, to the city of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Really because over the next 20 years, we're going to see 95% of global urban growth will occur in developing and emerging countries. Now, this is dramatically increasing the concentration of people and assets exposed to climate risks. But what we see in Tanzania is a growing recognition by the government and its development partners that a proactive and preventative actions are critical to minimize and better manage future risks. So Dar es Salaam is one of the fastest growing cities in Africa. It's got a population of about 6 million, and it's increasing at about 4.5%. It's got an annual growth rate of about 4.5%. So huge influx of people into the city. And we're providing technical assistance for the World Bank under the wider Tanzania Urban Resilience Programme. This is a partnership between the World Bank and the UK Department for International Development. Dar es Salaam suffers from significant flood risk, and there are a number of activities in the region that are active to help better understand the drivers and potential interventions that could reduce the overall impact of flooding. So we were commissioned a short study commissioned by the World Bank to look at a specific issue widely believed to be a major contributor to flooding in the city, and that's the issue around erosion and sedimentation. So our specialist geomorphology team have conducted site visits to the region and carried out a desktop modelling study to understand the causes and the effects of widespread sedimentation in the city. The study's not just been looking within the city, but also in the upstream sections of 9 catchments that are being studied. So the erosion witnessed in the catchments around Dar es Salaam is transporting huge volumes of sediment into the river systems. This is reducing the capacity of the rivers themselves to store water during flood season. The erosion is also exacerbated by removing vegetation used by the city's residents for building materials and fuel. So simplistically, this means that the next time it rains, we get more runoff, there's deeper erosion, leading to more sediment being added to the river systems to deposit further downstream in the city. So we carried out a study using a combination of modelling and satellite image interpretation to look at the whole of these catchments, so these 9 different catchments. And we're finalising what you can see here is a map, a draft map from the atlas that we're actually finalising at the moment. And these are reference maps that will help communicate using geolocated examples from field surveys where and why erosion susceptibility is at its highest, looking at sort of the relative erosion risk across the whole region. So from these maps and data, we're then able to provide indicative estimates of sediment volumes, and those sediment volume estimates can be used to target in-depth cost-benefit studies for wider scale interventions. And those may be sediment traps, dredging, or even nature-based solutions. But as with Suriname, it's unlikely that one single measure will really solve what is, again, a very complex problem. So that this fact is recognised by those who have commissioned the study. The World Bank, DFID and others are providing investments that are transformative and that are trying to promote an integrated approach to rehabilitation. So ultimately, we're trying to help improve the risk understanding and to help, therefore, with the strengthening of the emergency management. So I'm now going to pass across to Jess, but remember, if you do have questions, drop them into the Q&A box at the top or bottom of your screen, depending which way around you're looking at it. So really, to summarize my side of things, if the examples that have in Suriname and Tanzania have shown how technical assistance from a variety of disciplines has helped develop integrated flood risk management strategies. These are informing policy and investment decisions, but ultimately helping promote a more resilient development and improved emergency management. So I'm going to hand across to Jess, who will give you a couple of examples about how JBA's data and models, which have originally been developed for insurance applications, are also being used to support disaster risk management activities.
Thanks, John. Now I'll take you over to Sri Lanka. JBA has been working with the Insurance Development Forum to enhance the effectiveness of the Sri Lankan disaster insurance scheme. This is a scheme which provides emergency payouts for uninsured households and micro businesses to natural disasters, including flood. The work started with trying to better understand the scheme's exposure to flood risk. JBA developed an exposure database to represent the uninsured households and micro businesses that were eligible for cover. Many low-income households and businesses could benefit from the scheme. This example shows a house with an adjoining unregistered grocery shop, which is covered under the scheme. The scheme also hopes to continue helping people like Premalal, whose house was flooded in 2016. He also runs his welding business from the same property, and this was interrupted until the floodwater subsided and he was able to replace damaged machinery with payouts from the scheme. The original intention of this study was to better understand the exposure, but because JBA had already developed a catastrophe model for Sri Lanka and for the reinsurance market, we were able to probabilistically model the flood risk to the properties. The project also includes the conversion of the model to Oasis format to enable the wider risk community to access the model. In contrast to the Sri Lanka model, which was originally developed for insurance purposes, the Sierra Leone model we developed specifically for disaster risk reduction purposes. We were able to use our already existing global flood maps and event sets to develop the model which quantifies the impact on people and property due to the catastrophic flood events. This project was funded by the World Bank, and JBA worked with ARIP to contribute the flood component to a multi-hazard and risk assessment to 3 key cities in Sierra Leone. These 3 cities were selected because they have each been affected by devastating natural disasters in the recent past, including floods that have killed hundreds of people and affected tens of thousands. The hazards identified for the study were flooding, landslides, and sea level rise, with a present day and climate change view of each of those. The results of this project will hopefully be used to increase the resilience against disasters in these cities and to contribute to planning to avoid people building in high-risk zones. The types of properties that are typically built in these zones are the most vulnerable property types, such as informal settlements. The outputs could also be used to identify the locations with the highest risk of flooding, so regions could be prioritized for intervention if necessary. So what I'm showing there on the right-hand side is the regions in the darker shade of orange are those with the largest risk to life in the capital city of Freetown. So it was mid-August 2017 when we were finalising these results to be sent to the World Bank, when a large landslide initiated on the slopes of Sugar Mountain in the capital city of Freetown. So it initiated at the point of that star there in the image. 3 days of torrential rainfall destabilised the slope, and the landslide initiated and then mixed with the already full rivers to turn into a mob flow that then propagated down through the residential areas in region and Lumley of Sierra Leone. In this event, over 1,000 people lost their lives and many more were left homeless along the path of the mud flow. Although the main aim of this project was to produce a static view of risk that could be used for planning, in this case there was an urgent requirement to provide more information immediately after the event occurred to help inform the recovery effort. Because the model was complete at this point, we were able to extract events from the catalogue that were similar to the unfolding event in terms of the meteorological conditions and the geographic extent. We then use these events to model and estimate the potential impact in terms of the number of people and properties affected. So real-time analysis of this flood event wasn't the original aim of the project, but I'll now hand back over to John, who will talk about projects within JBA that do focus on real-time flood monitoring.
Great, thanks, Jess. I'm now going to take you, we've got a couple more stops on our world tour. I'm now going to take you into Vietnam to talk about a project that we're providing assistance to, and that is around the development of flood forecasting systems and building capacity within flood forecasting centres. So this is really around better preparing for the next event and for the ongoing management of flood risk. So it draws on quite an extensive body of work carried out in the UK and Ireland. This is with the Environment Agency, with Natural Resources Wales, Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, amongst others. And in these projects, we've built, calibrated, and deployed probably hundreds of flood forecasting models for these organisations. And we're also providing asset-focused forecasting systems for the private sector, particularly for the road and rail infrastructure owners and operators. So Vietnam intends to increase its resilience it's resilience for people and also for economic assets under the framework of the Vietnam Natural Disaster Prevention, Response and Mitigation Strategy towards 2020. Its implementation relies on a World Bank investment loan to help strengthen weather forecasting and early warning systems. So we've been commissioned to develop a software system. I'm just getting the animation going. A software system for the Natural Hydrometeorological Service that will equip a team of forecasters with information on forecast inland as well as coastal flooding, including flooding caused by tropical cyclones. And I should say we're delivering this collaboratively through a joint venture with German firm Kisters and also Vietnamese firm Harmony Software Technologies. So we're building a software system that you can see here that will provide a team of forecasters with the most up-to-date information available for inland flooding, whether that's from river gauges or forecast models, but as well as that, we've got coastal data on coastal flooding. So it's a large-scale data sourcing and integration project with all the information pulled into an open software system, Delfuse, generated by Deltares. And this means that forecasters are able to get hold of the live data as an event is unfolding, pulling up all the information that they need to help determine the impact of the event and provide public-facing warnings. But the tools can also help with exercising. So also help allowing modification of the data to show what-if scenarios. And this is particularly useful during major typhoon events, which can cause significant disruption and loss to coastal communities. We're also actively involved in a similar project in India, which is setting up and training an operational forecasting center in Chennai, which is a city of about 7 million people. And India is the last port of call, where, again, I'm going to go into a bit more detail about some of our forecasting systems. So a significant problem that we're tackling here is really to try and help people understand where water is during flood events. Now, this isn't only finding evidence of flooding after an event by taking an image, but also using models, sensors, and software systems to provide forecasts of flood inundation and the associated impacts and loss estimates. So in the UK, we're really fortunate to have access to so much open data. We're able to look at river levels and flow data in rivers during a flood event. However, what they don't tell us is where will the water go when a river reaches a particular level. How many houses will be affected? Which schools will be flooded? What roads will be disrupted? What is my aggregate loss to this event likely to be? So the flood maps I described earlier are a representation of general flood hazard around the world. These maps are not designed to show what's happening or going to happen during an actual flood event. But we've actually developed a framework which we call Flood Foresight, and it couples a library of pre-computed flood maps with current or forecast conditions of flooding. So forecast or real-time in-channel flows are used to assess the localized rarity of the flooding, which we're then able to access the library of maps and select the relevant map segment for that location at that point in time. We're able to update maps very frequently. In the UK, we update them every 3 hours, and all the maps can be analyzed then with receptor data, with asset or exposure data. So the animation here is on the Brahmaputra in the 2017, and we're showing up to 9-day lead time of a major flood event, and we're showing this as probabilistic outputs. So these are where we've coupled the European Commission's Global Flood Awareness System, GLOFAS, with JBA's maps, JBA's flood maps, providing a probabilistic estimate of flooding on the Brahmaputra in this event. And we're able to compare those with footprints derived from satellite images, and we're able to get a reference of what this event would look like during one point in time. But actually in our animations, we're able to represent very closely the same impact up to 8, 7, 6 days lead time. So this is a very large river basin, and we're able to use our flow estimates to then choose appropriate flood maps from which we run impact analyses. So we're presenting the forecast flood maps to users as the event progresses, allowing them to dynamically assess what the potential impact of the event is and enabling them to carry out activities that will reduce overall impact. So we're providing a common operating picture, if you will, of a flood as it unfolds that can be used by a number of users, so insurance companies, transportation authorities, utilities companies, or NGOs. And we're really interested in this application, the potential application in an international development context. So we've been having discussions with NGOs, with companies offering parametric insurance products that will enable action to be taken prior to an event arriving. So we're still evaluating the improvement that providing forecast and real-time inundation and depth data will have on these operations. And we'd be very interested in discussing with any of you who are working in flood emergency management. So the flood foresight framework allows users to get hold of the best available data, not just JBA maps, but also national and local flood maps, local exposure information, river gauges, forecast models, as well as Earth observation data. It's a very efficient method for flood mapping that can scale globally, and we're very excited about these applications of the maps to support emergency management. So Jess and I have given you a very brief insight into a number of areas of JBA's expertise, of our data, of our models, of our software, and how we're trying to support a range of risk and emergency management activities around the world. We couldn't have done this alone, and so we're very, very grateful to all of our collaborators with whom we've been honing our joint offerings. You know, we look forward to continuing these collaborations and as well as building some new ones for the future. The flood and climate risk issues that we're tackling are hugely complex, and they do require multidisciplinary teams. So feel free to get in touch with us if you'd like any more information on any of the projects mentioned here or on our website.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Jess. That was a fantastic and inspiring trip around the world. We've had some questions come in, but before I move over to the questions, just to let people know that all the flood maps are available on Oasis Hub. So if you use the web address that's provided there, what I'll do is with the recording, you'll be able to scoop that address out and use that on the hub. So you simply click the get price button and we'll be able to respond to you with pricing and download instructions for any of the regions that you're interested in. At the moment, we just have one example of the flood map there that's available, but we have them for every region around the world at the moment. So I'd like to again thank Jess and John for that tour of the world. One of the questions that's come in, we've literally been all over the world, but are there common challenges that you face in these projects in different parts of the world?
Yeah, I suppose there would be. Now, every project will bring up its own challenges, just depending on the context, whether that's a physical environment, the political arena, or any other previous work that's been done in the region. Some ministers that we work with may already be planning future intervention measures to be seen to be tackling the flood risk problem. Other studies may have shown that a particular course of action is the best option. So really what we're trying to do is present our work in a transparent manner as possible, showing our assumptions, showing our working, showing the data sources that we use, and really laying bare the method. But I think the biggest, one of the other challenges that are faced around a large number of these projects is the challenge of uncontrolled development. We saw how that's perhaps exacerbating the flood risk in Dar es Salaam with deforestation and devegetation effectively, in increasing the overall flood risk. So that's a challenge. And finally, I think data is a challenge when it comes to modeling and comes to the the legwork that we actually undertake. I think getting hold of data, we can see in the UK we've got an abundance of data which we can build flood models, forecasting systems, or dashboards. But internationally, we do spend a lot of time on our projects trying to work out what data exists in that country or region, trying to wrangle it out of the government or the government agencies or academics. And then there's the quality of the data when you get it. How have these data sets been developed? Will we be able to access them? Does it have enough metadata? And for what purpose was it developed? So where possible, we do want to try and use as much local data as we can, but access to data can often be crops its head up in most of these projects. We do have some workarounds, which I think we're quite uniquely placed to offer workarounds if we can't get hold of it, whether that's taking off the shelf commercial data like our global flood maps, or develop new data such as we're doing in Dar es Salaam. We couldn't get hold of detailed soils data, and we're actually working with Humanitarian OpenStreetMap and the World Bank to crowdsource a new sediment map for the whole region, and therefore we're providing new open data to the area. So skirted around maybe a little bit, Jim, but hopefully I've answered your question. So.
No, not skirted around at all. It was a complete answer, and just something, a couple of things you mentioned there, John, that I'd like to emphasize. Work that we're doing at the Hub as well is we're developing a crowdsourcing platform, and the idea behind that is to help plug some of the gaps in the whole data landscape. So especially in developing economies, as John's already said, there are huge gaps in data, and they are typically the areas that are going to suffer the worst consequences of climate-related disasters. So what we're looking to do is to provide a platform that allows people to kind of crowdsource data to help either, in the case of a particular project, or to make it available for a general sort of public good. So thanks for that, John. Right, we've got a lot more questions coming in.
Yeah, I'm just having a look at some of those now. I'm just starting at the top. I mean, how is it estimated, the number of people? So it probably refers back to the 2 billion figure that I mentioned at the start, and quite simply, that was an intersection of the 100-year river and surface water flood extents with a population data set for 2020. So this data set had already been generated using population projections. The data set we used was the Gridded Population of the World, version 4, from CSIN, the Center of International Earth Science Information Network out of Columbia University. So that's how we got to the 2 billion figure.
Thanks, John.
Just while I'm talking, I can answer Stu's question about flood foresight. So the question about flood foresight, the animation showed flooded area, kilometre square per administrative area, but does it also provide kilometres of roads flooded or number of schools, hospitals flooded? I suppose the way flood foresight has been set up is very modular in nature, and therefore it allows us to generate the flood maps, which is independent of any impact that may be calculated on a particular portfolio or asset data set. And so we generate those flood footprints, and then we're able to then bolt on impact modules that are required by our clients. So in the insurance case, an organization will have its own insured portfolio, and we're able to look at that insured portfolio with our flood maps to estimate the claims count or the potential loss. With a transportation authority, we're able to then take the roads data set, and we're able to intersect that with the flood maps being produced. So the system can be configured to generate any sort of impact data that we're able to compute using standard geospatial analyses. Great, thanks, John.
We've had a question also about types of digital terrain models using within these projects. So someone said, are they spaceborne, aerial derived, or LiDAR, and what resolution? So the resolution and the data source for the DTMs will vary depending on the region. So globally, we have access to things like spaceborne observations like SRTM, things at 30-meter resolution. And then in other locations, we have much higher resolution, more high quality data, such as LiDAR in the UK. And so in places like the UK and the US, we increasingly have access to 5-meter data. And so our mapping, flood modeling, flood mapping is then done at that high resolution.
Great, thanks, Jess.
I see another question from Jeremy. What is the biggest gap on the road to better flood risk resilience? Is it data to help build the models, for example, historical river data or 5-meter elevation data, or understanding and communicating what the end user needs? I suppose we've got a bit of a conflict. You know, there is institutions trying to tackle problems such as flood risk in a particular city or region, but then on the same time there is an insatiable desire by people to move into cities to consume the trees and vegetation and clear places so they can move in. So you've got this uncontrolled development occurring at the same time as that you're trying to that ministers and organizations are trying to invest to improve the overall situation. So I think, to put my neck on the line, Jeremy, I think the issue probably is more around institutional. How do you curtail or slow the processes that are actually contributing to the overall risk? Now, intervention measures should probably then also look at what future projections would be, depending on future projections of both urban growth, but as well as climate change. So I hope that was useful.
Thanks, John. It's almost like a kind of reverse King Canute, isn't it? Holding back the tide of people rather than holding back the sea coming in. Right, what else have we got here?
So we have one question here from Hani asking, what is the algorithm used to generate a flood risk map? So there's lots of different methods we can use to develop data on flood risk. So first we develop data on the flood hazard. So that would be running physical models, solving the 2D shallow water equations to actually route the flood water over the terrain to allow it to pool in certain areas to get our flood hazard maps. Then we would then have a number of methods used to intersect that with our exposure to develop the risk side of things. And so that usually takes into account the vulnerability of the properties or the people or anything that's at risk to the flooding. And then the risk could be calculated either deterministically or probabilistically using a flood catastrophe model.
Great, thanks, Jess. Right, what else have we got there? Any?
I think we've gone through the main ones, Jim.
Great. Okay. Just one other question that's come in, which we'll kind of round out on, is flood maps to capture. Do the flood maps capture flash flooding?
Yes, so our global flood maps are both for riverine flooding, but also for surface water flooding, which is also known as flash flooding or pluvial flooding. So they take into account both those sources of flooding.
Great. Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to, first of all, thank Jess and John for a fantastic presentation and, for all the work that they're doing and sharing that work with you. As John said, if you've got any questions, please do get in touch with us and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. There will be, it'll take a day or so for the video to convert and me to post it. But what I will do is you will receive a follow-up email to thank you for your attendance and also provide a link to the recording of the webinar as well. So for now, it just rests with me to say thank you very much to Jess and John, and thank you very much to all of you for your time today, and enjoy the rest of the morning, afternoon or evening, depending where you are. Thanks very much. Take care and bye for now.